Have you ever found yourself in a place that felt like a sanctuary, a safe haven from the chaos of the world, only to have that peace shattered in an instant? Jack Wilson, a dedicated police officer, thought he had found such a place in a small Detroit diner. For years, it was his refuge, a place where he could escape the weight of his duties and just be himself. But one day, that sense of security was ripped away by a single act of prejudice, turning his haven into a battleground. What began as a simple visit to the diner on his day off spiraled into an intense confrontation that exposed deep-rooted biases and forced Jack to stand up for more than just his own dignity. This story takes you on an emotional journey, from the comfort of a familiar place to the harsh reality of discrimination, and finally to the uplifting power of community and justice. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. The Detroit sunlight gently streamed through the diner's large windows, casting golden streaks over the well-worn red vinyl booths and across the black and white checkered floor. The rich aroma of sizzling beef patties mingled with the bold scent of freshly brewed coffee, creating an intoxicating warmth that wrapped itself around Jack Wilson, beckoning him like an old friend. Today, however, Jack wasn't donning his usual crisp uniform. Instead, he was dressed in a simple, worn t-shirt and faded jeans, his badge tucked out of sight. This was one of those rare days when he allowed himself to step away from the weight of duty, a day to breathe freely without the burden of his badge. For nearly 10 years, Jack had sought refuge in this diner, a humble establishment where he could simply be Jack, not Officer Wilson. The cheerful jingle of the doorbell announced his presence as he stepped inside, greeted by the comforting hum of lively conversations and the rhythmic clinking of dishes. His eyes instinctively swept the room, locking onto familiar faces that felt like home. "Good morning, Jack," Emily called out, her voice as warm as the smile that spread across her face. She was a young waitress, always approachable, and over the years, she had become a friendly fixture in Jack's life. "Morning, Emily," Jack responded with a nod, making his way toward his usual booth by the window. Outside, the world rushed by, but within the diner, everything seemed to slow to a soothing, unhurried pace. Sinking into the booth, Jack felt a wave of relief wash over him. This was his sanctuary, a place where the demands of his world could momentarily melt away. He anticipated his regular order, his beloved burger, always with extra pickles. Emily approached with a menu, although they both knew he had no need for it. "Just the usual," Emily, Jack said, a familiar grin spreading across his face. "Coming right up," she replied cheerfully, jotting down the order she had committed to memory long ago. But just as Jack was about to settle into the comforting rhythm of his day off, an unexpected disruption shattered the peace. A heavy hand slammed down on the menu in front of him, startling Jack out of his thoughts. He looked up, eyes meeting the cold, unwelcoming gaze of a man he didn't recognize, a burly figure with a face hardened by something darker than simple duty. This was definitely not Sam, the usual manager. "Hold it right there," the man growled, his voice dripping with an unmistakable hostility. "You lost or something?" Confusion flickered across Jack's face. "Just here for a burger, same as always," he replied, his tone steady but cautious. The man leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing as he scrutinized Jack with a look that could freeze the sun. "This ain't the kind of place for folks like you," he spat out, his words sharp and stinging as he yanked the menu away and tossed it carelessly onto another table. Jack felt a cold wave of disbelief wash over him as the man's words settled in. The once warm and inviting atmosphere of the diner suddenly grew tense, the friendly chatter dwindling to an uncomfortable silence. Jack's eyes darted around the room, only to find the other patrons now avoiding his gaze, their faces clouded with unease and shame. "Folks like me," Jack echoed, his voice calm on the surface, but underneath, a quiet storm of anger was beginning to brew. The man scoffed, his expression twisted with contempt. "Yeah, you heard me. Folks who look like you." With that, the man turned his back on Jack, leaving him alone to wrestle with the bitter sting of blatant prejudice. The comforting scent of burgers that once filled the air now seemed nauseating, leaving behind only a hollow bitterness. Jack sat there, frozen in his seat, his mind reeling as he tried to process what had just happened. This diner, his haven, had suddenly transformed into hostile territory. The initial shock quickly gave way to a deeper, burning resolve. Jack realized that this wasn't just about a burger or a day off, it was about something much larger. This moment, as raw and painful as it was, lit a fire within him. He couldn't let this injustice slide. He had to stand up, not just for himself, but for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. With his heart pounding and the weight of the man's hateful words still echoing in his mind, Jack slowly rose from his seat. "This isn't the place for folks like you," the manager's venomous voice lingered in the air. Anger surged through him, but beneath it was an unshakable determination. This diner had always been a place where he could escape and find solace, but now it had become a battlefield, and Jack knew he couldn't walk away without fighting back. Drawing in a deep breath, Jack steeled himself and made his way to the counter, where the man stood, his demeanor rigid and unyielding. The time for silence had passed. "Excuse me," Jack began, his voice steady but filled with the weight of what had just transpired. "We need to address what you said back there." His words hung in the air, heavy with both frustration and determination. The manager spun around, eyes narrowing with disdain. "There's nothing to discuss. I told you to leave. This isn't a place for people like you." Jack's fists clenched at his sides as he fought to keep his composure. Every muscle in his body was tense, but his voice remained calm. "You can't deny service to someone because of their race. That's illegal, and you know it." A scoff escaped the manager's lips, a twisted smile of mockery curling at the corners of his mouth. "Oh, that's rich. A cop lecturing me about the law." His tone dripped with sarcasm and contempt. Before Jack could say another word, the manager's hand shot forward, shoving him hard in the chest. The force knocked Jack backward, sending him crashing into a nearby table. The once comforting clatter of dishes and hum of conversations abruptly ceased, replaced by a chorus of gasps from stunned diners. The air, once warm and welcoming, had turned cold with tension and hostility. Jack's instincts as a police officer kicked in, his training surging to the forefront of his mind. He straightened up, his posture firm and unyielding. "I didn't want it to come to this," he said, his voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of restrained power. He stepped forward, ready to defend himself if necessary. The manager swung at him, his punch wild and clumsy. Jack dodged it with ease, then swiftly grabbed the man's arm, twisting it behind his back and pushing him against the counter. The manager squirmed, cursing under his breath, but Jack held firm, his grip unrelenting. Enough, Jack's voice boomed through the diner, echoing off the walls. The once bustling room had fallen into an eerie silence, every eye locked on the unfolding scene. The diners, who just moments before had been immersed in their meals and conversations, now sat frozen in their seats. Some averted their gaze, too uncomfortable to watch, while others whispered in hushed tones, the unease thick in the air. Releasing the manager, Jack stepped back as the man staggered away, rubbing his arm and glaring at him with a mixture of anger and humiliation. "You think you're something special just because you're a cop," the manager spat. "You think that badge gives you the right to do whatever you want." Jack raised his hands in a calming gesture, taking a deep breath to steady himself. "I don't want any trouble. I'm just here for a meal, like any other customer. I've been coming to this diner for years without an issue. Why start now?" The manager sneered, his face twisted with bitterness. "Because now we have standards. We don't need your kind stirring up problems here." Jack felt a wave of frustration crash over him, mingling with an overwhelming sense of sadness. He glanced around the diner, searching for some glimmer of support among the patrons he had shared countless quiet mornings with. But all he found were averted eyes and whispered conversations. The stark isolation he felt in that moment was suffocating. The next morning, Jack walked into the precinct, his mind still reeling from the events of the previous day. The familiar sounds of ringing phones and clicking keyboards filled the air, but something felt off. The usual camaraderie, the easy banter between colleagues, had been replaced with an uncomfortable silence. He could feel the weight of curious glances and hear the hushed whispers that followed him as he moved through the station. "Wilson, my office Captain Roberts called out, breaking through the tension. Jack made his way to the office, closing the door behind him as he stepped inside. Roberts gestured for him to take a seat, his expression unreadable. "Jack," the captain began, his tone serious, "you know this situation is going to be tough. Internal Affairs is already on it, and the media has picked up the story. This isn't going to be easy." "I understand," Captain Jack replied, meeting his superior's gaze with resolve. "I just want the truth to come out. That's all I've ever wanted." Roberts nodded, a look of empathy softening his stern features. "I believe you, Jack, but you need to be ready. There are going to be people who will try to twist this, turn it into something it's not. Stay strong and don't lose sight of who you are. Keep your head up." Jack nodded, a mix of gratitude and determination settling in his chest. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to face whatever came next. He had no choice but to stand tall, to fight for what was right not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel less than they were. As Jack stepped up to the microphone, he felt a whirlwind of emotions swirling inside him. The warm, encouraging applause from the crowd made his heart swell, but the weight of the moment pressed down on his shoulders. The community center, usually a place of comfort and calm, now buzzed with an energy charged by purpose and concern. Taking a deep breath, Jack gripped the microphone, steadying himself. He glanced out at the sea of faces, all of whom had gathered to support him and to confront a larger, more insidious issue. "Thank you," Jack began, his voice slightly shaky but growing stronger with each word. "Thank you all for being here tonight. To see so many of you show up means more to me than I can express. But this isn't just about me. What happened at the diner, it's about all of us. It's about the kind of community we want to live in." He paused, the room utterly silent as every pair of eyes stayed fixed on him, hanging on his words. "When I walked into that diner yesterday, I was just a guy looking for a meal. I've been going there for years, and it always felt like a safe place, a home away from home. But all it took was one moment, one man's prejudice, to change everything. That feeling of safety was stripped away in an instant, replaced by fear and anger." Jack's voice grew firmer as he continued, the rawness of his emotions palpable. "I've spent my entire career upholding the law, believing in justice. And yet, here I was, facing discrimination simply because of how I look. It's a harsh reality that too many people face every single day. And it's not right. It's not right for any of us to feel like we don't belong, whether it's because of the color of our skin, our background, or any other reason." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of those who had come to stand with him. "But I'm not here to focus on the hate. I'm here to talk about what we can do, together, to make sure this doesn't happen again. We can't just let these things slide. We have to call them out, confront them, and stand up for each other, because that's what a community does." The crowd remained silent, their attention unwavering, their expressions filled with a mix of empathy, outrage, and determination. Jack felt a surge of hope as he saw the collective strength in the room. "As painful as this experience has been," Jack continued, his tone softening, "I know it's also a chance for change. This moment right here is proof of that. We're here, together, ready to face this head on. And I'm ready to fight not just for myself, but for everyone who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong. With a final breath, Jack looked out over the crowd once more. Thank you for standing with me tonight. This is just the beginning, but together, I know we can make a difference. As he stepped away from the microphone, the room erupted into applause, louder and more sustained than before. Jack felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over him. The journey ahead would be long and difficult, but in this moment, surrounded by his community, he knew he wasn't facing it alone. Mrs. Linda took the stage again, her eyes glistening with pride. Thank you, Jack, for those powerful words. Now, let's open up the floor for anyone who wants to share their thoughts or experiences. This is a conversation we need to have, and I'm so glad we're starting it here tonight. One by one, people rose to speak, sharing their own stories of discrimination, offering words of encouragement, and discussing ways to promote inclusivity and justice in their community. Jack listened intently, his heart swelling with both the pain of the stories shared and the unwavering resolve of those around him. By the end of the night, the community had not only shown their support for Jack, but had also laid the groundwork for meaningful change. They had pledged to stand together, to challenge prejudice wherever they found it, and to create a community where everyone felt safe and valued. As Jack left the community center that evening, the anxiety that had weighed so heavily on him earlier had been replaced with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew the battle wasn't over far from it, but with his community by his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. Thank you, Mrs. Linda, Jack began, his voice steady but laced with humility. His gaze swept over the crowd, taking in the familiar faces of his community. And thank you all for showing up tonight. What happened to me is just one incident, but it's part of a much bigger issue that affects so many of us every day. This isn't just my story, it's our story. It's something we need to confront together. He paused, taking a deep breath as he gathered his thoughts. The room was silent, everyone waiting to hear what he had to say. The other day at the diner, I was refused service because of the color of my skin. It hit me hard, reminding me that no matter how much we think we've progressed, discrimination is still a painful reality. But seeing all of you here tonight gives me hope. It shows me that we're not willing to stand by and let this kind of injustice continue unchecked. The room remained silent, the weight of Jack's words settling over everyone present. He could see the seriousness in their faces, the determination in their eyes. These were his neighbors, his community, standing with him in solidarity. But tonight isn't just about my experience, Jack continued. I want to hear from you. Let's talk about our own experiences, let's share our stories, and let's figure out how we can support one another as we fight against this kind of injustice. One by one, members of the community stood up to speak. An elderly man, his voice tinged with both weariness and wisdom, recounted the painful memories of racism he had endured decades ago. A young mother, her voice shaking with emotion, shared the challenges her children faced in school, battling both overt and subtle forms of discrimination. A local business owner spoke about the quiet biases that shadowed his daily interactions, the unspoken judgments that made life just a little harder for him every day. As Jack listened to these stories, he felt an overwhelming sense of connection. This wasn't just his fight, it was theirs too. Their pain, their struggles, their resilience, they were all intertwined. The collective strength of this community was more powerful than he had ever imagined. He realized that together, they had the potential to create real change. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Jack noticed movement at the back of the room. Emily stood up. He hadn't seen her arrive, but now all eyes were on her as she made her way to the front. The once easygoing waitress from the diner now stood before the crowd with a quiet determination. "Hi everyone," Emily began, her voice a little shaky but filled with resolve. "I'm Emily. I was working at the diner that day when everything happened. I saw it all, and I recorded it." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jack's heart began to race. He hadn't expected this, hadn't known that someone had captured the incident on tape. His mind whirled, but he remained rooted in place, waiting to hear what she had to say. Emily took a deep breath and continued. I knew it wasn't right the way the manager treated Jack. It was horrible, and I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. I recorded the conversation because I thought it might be important, and now I want to share it with all of you. She pulled out her phone, and the room grew deathly quiet. The tension was thick as everyone waited with bated breath. Emily pressed play, and the manager's venomous words rang out through the room. The hostility, the cruelty, it was all laid bare for everyone to hear. Jack could feel the anger and discomfort radiating from the crowd as the reality of the situation hit home. When the recording ended, there was a moment of stunned silence before the room erupted into applause. People clapped, cheered, and some even stood in support of Emily's bravery. Jack felt a swell of gratitude toward her. Her courage to step forward had turned the tide. This was the kind of proof they needed, and Emily had provided it. "Thank you, Emily," Jack said, taking the microphone once again. His voice was filled with appreciation and strength. "This is exactly the kind of evidence we need. Together we can make sure that voices like the manager's don't go unchallenged. We have the power to stand up to this. To make sure that our community is one where no one is made to feel less than they are because of the color of their skin or any other reason." The room was filled with a renewed sense of purpose. Jack looked around at the faces of those who had come together to support him and each other. This was just the beginning, but for the first time, Jack felt like they were on the path to something better, something stronger. He wasn't just standing up for himself anymore, he was standing up for everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. And with this community by his side, Jack knew they could make a difference. The forum stretched late into the night, with each story shared strengthening the bond between everyone present. As the hours passed, the air became thick with a mixture of grief and resolve, each tale of discrimination lighting a fire of solidarity and purpose. By the time the last speaker finished, Jack felt a powerful surge of determination course through him. He realized that this wasn't just about him anymore, it was about fighting for the dignity and respect of his entire community. The shift from the warmth of the community center to the cold formality of the courtroom was jarring. The room was sterile, the polished wooden benches and imposing judge's bench casting a somber shadow over the proceedings. Jack sat at the plaintiff's table, his heart hammering against his ribcage, every breath a battle against the anxiety clawing at him. Seated beside him, Emily offered a quiet but steadfast reassurance, her presence like a lifeline in the midst of the storm. Their attorney, Elena Rodriguez, a seasoned veteran in civil rights cases, was focused, flipping through her notes as she prepared for the battle that lay ahead. "Remember," Jack, Elena said, her voice calm yet filled with unshakable resolve, "we have a strong case. Stick to the truth, and we'll navigate this together." Jack nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He glanced over at Emily, who flashed him a supportive smile. "We've got this," she whispered, her voice brimming with confidence that bolstered his own. As the judge entered, the room collectively rose to its feet, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. When the proceedings began, Elena stood tall, her presence commanding as she delivered her opening statement. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice clear and unwavering, "this case represents more than just one man's struggle. It highlights a systemic problem that affects countless lives daily. We intend to prove that the defendant, Mr. Hank Thompson, did not merely discriminate against Mr. Wilson, but fostered an environment steeped in racism within his establishment." The defense attorney, Richard Barnes, was quick to respond. He was a sharply dressed man, his polished appearance exuding an air of confidence as he addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, my client, Mr. Thompson, is a reputable businessman who has been unfairly accused. What we have here is a misunderstanding, exaggerated by individuals with personal motives. We will demonstrate that Mr. Thompson acted within his legal rights. And these allegations are baseless. As the trial unfolded, Elena meticulously laid out their case with precision and care. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as she played Emily's recording, the sharp sting of Thompson's hateful words hanging in the air. The jury listened intently as his venomous tone filled the room, the blatant discrimination echoing off the walls, leaving little doubt about his intentions. Witness after witness came forward, each one bravely recounting their own experiences of mistreatment at the diner. These testimonies painted a grim picture of a pattern of racism that extended far beyond Jack's single encounter. Each voice added weight to their argument, turning the spotlight on a culture of exclusion that had long festered unchecked. With every testimony, Jack's hope grew stronger. The truth was no longer just his burden to bear, it was the collective truth of a community that had endured too much for too long. The more he heard, the more he believed in their fight for justice. He wasn't alone in this, they were all in it together, and together, they could make a difference. But the defense was unrelenting, determined to dismantle the case piece by piece. Barnes, the defense attorney, launched his cross-examinations with an aggressive intensity, probing each witness's story, attempting to find cracks in their testimonies. He was calculating and sharp, trying to twist their words to weaken the prosecution's narrative. When Jack finally took the stand, Barnes seemed to sharpen his focus, zeroing in on him with an almost predatory precision. "Mr. Wilson," Barnes began, his tone deceptively calm, "isn't it true that you have a history of conflicts? That you've been known to overreact in tense situations?" Jack felt a flicker of heat rise within him, but he kept his composure. He had prepared for this moment, and he wasn't about to let Barnes rattle him. "No," Jack said evenly, "that's not true. I've always made it a point to handle conflicts professionally." Barnes smirked, his eyes glinting as he leaned in, pressing further. "And yet, you found yourself in a physical altercation at the diner that day, didn't you? Isn't that correct?" Jack's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "I was defending myself. Mr. Thompson pushed me first. I reacted in self-defense." The tension in the courtroom was thick, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. Jack could feel the weight of the jury's gaze on him, their eyes carefully studying his every move, their minds processing every word. He knew that this was a pivotal moment, that how he handled this cross-examination could make or break the case. Elena rose for the redirect examination, her presence a steadying force in the room. She approached Jack with a calm but purposeful stride. "Mr. Wilson," she began, her voice clear and unwavering, "can you describe the atmosphere in the diner before the incident? How were you treated by the regular staff and other patrons?" Jack nodded, drawing in a deep breath before he answered. "I was always treated well by the staff and most of the patrons. It was a place where I felt comfortable until Mr. Thompson confronted me. When he did, it was clear that he had a problem with me being there. His words, his actions, they were discriminatory. He made it obvious that people like me weren't welcome in his establishment." Elena turned to the jury, her eyes sweeping across their faces. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson. No further questions." As the trial days wore on, the community's support for Jack became increasingly visible. Outside the courthouse, protesters had gathered, their voices rising in a collective call for justice. They held signs with bold messages: "Justice for Jack, and racism now, and equality for all." Their chants reverberated through the air, a persistent reminder of the broader fight unfolding within those courtroom walls. Even through the thick walls of the courthouse, the faint echoes of their voices could be heard, a constant hum that underscored the gravity of the situation. One afternoon, during a brief recess in the proceedings, Jack and Emily found themselves sitting on a bench just outside the courthouse doors. The crowd of supporters had grown larger, the atmosphere charged with a mix of hope and urgency. People of all ages and backgrounds stood together, united in their demand for justice. Jack glanced at the growing crowd, a mix of gratitude and responsibility weighing on him. "I didn't expect this," he murmured to Emily, his eyes scanning the faces in the crowd. "All these people, they're here for us, for something so much bigger than just me." Emily nodded, her expression soft but resolute. "They're here because what you're fighting for matters, Jack. It's about standing up to something that's been wrong for too long. You're not just fighting for yourself, you're fighting for all of us." Jack let her words sink in, feeling the enormity of the moment. The fight was far from over, but with each passing day, the tide seemed to be turning in their favor. The community's unwavering support gave him strength, and he knew that no matter how relentless the defense was, they weren't standing alone. As the afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps, Jack steeled himself for what lay ahead. The battle was intense, and the stakes were high, but with the truth on their side and the strength of his community behind him, he felt more ready than ever to see it through to the end. "Do you think we're making a difference?" Emily asked softly, her eyes lingering on the protesters still gathered outside the courthouse. Their chants echoed faintly, mingling with the hum of the city. Jack glanced at the determined faces holding signs in the fading light. "I hope so," he replied. "This isn't just about us. It's about changing something bigger. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what we've been through. We have to believe it matters." Elena joined them, her usual calm demeanor edged with the seriousness of the fight ahead. "We're making progress," she said confidently. "The jury is paying attention. We just need to keep presenting our case with clarity and confidence. We're on the right path." The weight of the day settled heavily on Emily as she returned to her apartment that evening. The sense of accomplishment from the courtroom lingered, but so did the exhaustion from another grueling day. The twinkling city lights outside her window offered a small comfort as she moved through the familiar routine of preparing dinner. The distant murmur of traffic provided a soothing backdrop as she tried to unwind. But as she sat down with her meal, a gnawing feeling crept into her chest. Something felt off. The sudden, sharp knock on her door shattered the quiet. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly, she rose from her chair, her instincts on high alert as she approached the door. Peering through the peephole, she saw a man standing there, his face partially hidden beneath the hood. Something about him immediately set off alarm bells. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice betraying only a hint of the unease she felt. "Delivery," the man answered, his voice rough and unconvincing. Emily frowned, her mind racing. She hadn't ordered anything. Her fingers hovered over the lock, hesitating. Finally, she cracked the door open, leaving the chain securely in place. "I didn't order anything," she said cautiously. Before she could react, the man's hand shot out, slamming the door with such force that the chain snapped. The door flew open, and Emily stumbled backward, her heart pounding in her chest. Terror surged through her veins as the man advanced on her, his eyes gleaming with a sinister intent. "You need to stop," he growled, his hand clamping down on her arm like a vise. "Drop the case against Hank, or you'll regret it." Emily struggled against his grip, her breath coming in panicked gasps. "Let go of me," she shouted, her voice reverberating through the empty hallway. But the man's grip only tightened as he yanked her closer. In a flash, he pulled out a knife, the cold steel pressing against her side, sending a wave of dread crashing over her. "This is your last warning," he hissed, his breath hot against her face. "Back off, or next time it won't just be a warning." Pain seared through Emily's side as the blade bit into her skin. Desperation fueled her, and with all the strength she could muster, she kicked him hard in the shin. The sudden blow made him stumble, loosening his grip just enough for her to break free. She bolted for the door, but he lunged at her again, slashing at her arm with the knife. A cry of agony escaped her lips as white-hot pain blinded her. Suddenly, the door to a neighboring apartment flew open, and a startled voice rang out. "Hey, what's going on?" The attacker froze, his head snapping toward the source of the voice. Realizing he was no longer alone, he cursed under his breath and fled down the hallway, disappearing into the night. Emily collapsed to the floor, clutching her bleeding arm, her breath coming in ragged sobs. The shock of the attack left her trembling, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Her neighbor rushed to her side, panic etched across her face. "Emily. Oh my God, are you okay? What happened?" Emily's voice was barely a whisper, her strength fading as the pain and fear overwhelmed her. "Call 911, she gasped, tears streaming down her face. "Please call 911. The neighbor fumbled for her phone, dialing frantically as she knelt beside Emily, trying to comfort her. The hallway, once a place of safety and routine, had become a crime scene, the echoes of the attacker's threats lingering in the air. Within minutes, the wail of sirens pierced the air, growing louder as they neared. The paramedics arrived swiftly, their movements precise and focused as they began to assess Emily's injuries. Her world became a disorienting blur of flashing lights and urgent voices, every sensation heightened by the adrenaline surging through her veins. She fought to keep her eyes open, fear and anger warring within her as she struggled to process what had just happened. At the hospital, the chaotic blur of the ambulance ride gave way to the sterile calm of the emergency room. Jack burst through the doors, his heart racing, his mind frantic with worry. He spotted Emily almost immediately, lying on a hospital bed with her arm heavily bandaged, her face pale but her spirit unbroken. Relief and anger collided in his chest as he rushed to her side. "Emily," Jack choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "What happened? Are you okay?" Emily looked up at him, her eyes filled with a painful mixture of exhaustion and defiance. "It was a warning," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "They want us to drop the case against Hank. They're trying to scare us off." Jack's fists clenched at his sides, his jaw tightening as a wave of protective fury washed over him. "They won't scare us," he said firmly, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "We're in this together, Emily. We won't back down. We'll see this through, no matter what." As Emily was moved to a private room, the atmosphere around the hospital shifted. Security was ramped up significantly, officers were stationed at every entrance, and visitors were closely scrutinized before being allowed inside. The hospital, normally a place of healing and safety, now felt like a fortress under siege. But Jack knew it was necessary to keep Emily safe. While Emily rested and recovered, Jack threw himself into the work. The case had taken on a new urgency, and every piece of evidence felt like a lifeline. The recording Emily had made at the diner was already powerful, but a new video, captured by a patron during the altercation, had surfaced. This footage offered a different angle, clearly showing Hank's aggressive behavior and the vile racial slurs he had hurled at Jack. The evidence was damning, strengthening their case in ways Jack hadn't dared to hope for. Meanwhile, the investigation into Hank Thompson's connections began to reveal a tangled web of corruption that reached far beyond the walls of the diner. As the layers were peeled back, shocking details emerged. A city councilman with a reputation for staunch conservative views was implicated, and the scope of the scandal widened. What had started as a fight for justice against one man's bigotry had spiraled into something far larger, exposing the rot at the heart of the city's political machinery. The media, always hungry for a story, seized on the developments with fervor. The headlines blared with accusations of corruption and racism, and soon the case became the talk of the town. Early one morning, the news broke like a thunderclap across the city. Hank Thompson, now embroiled in a scandal of epic proportions, had vanished. His sudden disappearance came just as new evidence surfaced linking him directly to the broader corruption scandal. The media speculated wildly, and soon the entire city was buzzing with the question, where was Hank? Jack was at the precinct when the news of Hank's disappearance reached him. Captain Roberts approached him, his face etched with concern. "Hank's on the run," Roberts said grimly. "We've got teams combing the city, but he's slippery. He knows how to disappear." Jack felt the tension in the air grow heavier with each passing day. Every lead was pursued with relentless determination, but Hank seemed to always be one step ahead, slipping through their grasp each time they thought they were close. The city was abuzz with rumors, and the public's interest in the case had reached a fever pitch. Jack knew that finding Hank wasn't just about justice anymore, it was about the safety of everyone involved. The longer Hank remained at large, the more dangerous the situation became. The search continued day and night, each hour that passed adding to the weight on Jack's shoulders, but he refused to give up. The fight wasn't over, and he was prepared to see it through, no matter how long it took. The case had started as a personal battle for justice, but now it had become a fight for the soul of the city itself. And Jack wasn't going to rest until Hank was found and held accountable for everything he had done. One evening, a breakthrough finally came, a lead that sent a ripple of urgency through the entire team. A tip-off led authorities to a long-abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of the city. Once a hub of activity, the place had fallen into decay, now a tangle of crumbling buildings and overgrown weeds. It was the perfect hideout for someone desperate and on the run. Jack joined the team as they geared up and headed to the location. The tension was palpable as they moved in, their steps cautious and deliberate. The air was heavy with anticipation, the only sounds being the rustling of leaves in the wind and the distant hum of traffic. As they approached one of the larger, more dilapidated warehouses, a faint light flickered from within, casting eerie shadows on the broken windows. Captain Roberts, always calm under pressure, signaled for the team to proceed with extreme caution. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline surging through his veins. Every sense was heightened, his mind laser-focused on the task at hand. They couldn't afford any mistakes. As they entered the warehouse, the darkness enveloped them, save for the thin beams of light from their flashlights cutting through the gloom. The interior was a labyrinth of forgotten machinery, rusted and decayed from years of neglect. The team fanned out, each officer methodically sweeping their designated area. Jack moved with precision, his flashlight casting sharp shadows on the debris-strewn floor. The silence was oppressive, amplifying every creak and groan of the old building. Then, a noise barely more than a whisper caught Jack's attention. A soft scuffling sound, unmistakably human. Jack's pulse quickened as he honed in on the source of the sound. His flashlight swept across the room, finally catching a glimpse of movement, a figure darting between the hulking shapes of old machinery. There, Jack shouted, his voice cutting through the silence, and the chase began. Hank, looking wild-eyed and disheveled, bolted deeper into the warehouse, desperation driving him forward. But the officers were relentless, their pursuit swift and unwavering. Hank's attempt to flee was futile, and it wasn't long before his luck ran out. His foot caught on a jagged piece of metal, sending him sprawling to the ground with a hard, bone-jarring thud. Within seconds, Jack and another officer were on him, securing his hands in cuffs as he groaned in defeat. "You're done," Hank Jack said, his voice calm but laced with a fierce determination. Relief washed over him, mingled with the simmering anger that had fueled him throughout the chase. Hank glared up at Jack from the ground, his defiance flickering in his eyes like a dying flame. "You think this changes anything?" he spat, his voice filled with bitterness. Jack leaned in closer, his voice low and resolute. "It changes everything," he said with conviction. And as Hank was hauled to his feet and led away, Jack knew that this marked the beginning of the end, not just for Hank, but for the toxic web of corruption and hatred that had ensnared the city. Justice wasn't just a distant hope anymore, it was real, tangible, and finally within reach. As they led Hank out of the dim warehouse, the chaotic scene outside unfolded in a frenzy of flashing cameras and urgent voices. The media, waiting like vultures, captured every second of Hank Thompson's arrest. The air buzzed with the rapid-fire clicks of cameras and the relentless hum of reporters shouting questions, eager to broadcast the moment across the nation. Hank's capture wasn't just another headline, it became the center of a whirlwind news cycle, splashed across every screen, the top story on every channel. The arrest sent shockwaves through the public, sparking an immediate and overwhelming response. Jack and Emily found themselves at the heart of this storm. Support for them surged, a wave of solidarity from the community and beyond. People rallied behind them, their determination to see justice served only growing stronger in the face of the adversity they had endured. The outpouring of backing was powerful, reinforcing Jack and Emily's resolve. But alongside the triumph came a sobering truth. Despite Hank's capture, the shadows remained. The network of corruption and hatred that Hank had been part of was far-reaching, a tangled web that extended well beyond just one man. The threats against Jack, Emily, and others involved in the case hadn't vanished. If anything, they had intensified. They knew that taking down Hank was just the beginning of a much larger battle that would demand unwavering strength and vigilance. In the days that followed Hank's arrest, Jack and Emily found themselves thrust into a new and uncertain reality. Security around them tightened even further, every step they took carefully monitored. Their lives were under constant watch, and the danger lingered like a dark cloud that refused to dissipate. But with that danger came a fierce resolve and ironclad determination to see this fight through to the very end. One evening, as Jack sat by Emily's bedside in her hospital room, a rare moment of calm settled over them. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of the machines monitoring Emily's recovery. Outside, the world continued to spin, but here, in this small space, time seemed to slow. "We've come so far," Jack said quietly, his voice thick with emotion as he gazed at Emily. "But there's still so much left to do." Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of pain and determination. "We won't stop, Jack," she replied, her voice steady despite everything they had been through. "We owe it to everyone who's ever faced this kind of hatred. We'll see this through, no matter how long it takes." Their community's unwavering support and the truth they had fought so hard to bring to light gave them strength. They knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but as they looked toward the future, they were ready to face whatever challenges lay in their path, united, resolute, and unafraid. When Hank's trial finally began, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. The case had drawn attention far beyond their local community, turning into a significant event that had captured the nation's focus. Jack and Emily sat together at the front of the courtroom, their presence a quiet but powerful testament to the long and painful journey they had endured to seek justice. Order in the court, the judge's voice boomed, cutting through the low murmurs of the packed room. The tension was palpable as everyone fell silent, all eyes on the proceedings that were about to unfold. Elena, their fearless prosecutor, rose to her feet. Her confidence radiated through the room as she addressed the jury, her voice clear and compelling. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today we stand before you seeking justice for Jack Wilson and for the countless others who have suffered at the hands of Hank Thompson. What we will present is not just an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern of systemic racism and corruption." Her opening statement was powerful, setting the tone for what would be a meticulously built case. Elena methodically laid out the evidence, starting with the damning audio recording of Hank's discriminatory remarks, then moving on to the video footage from the diner. Each piece of evidence further painted a picture of Hank's blatant disregard for decency and the law. The tension in the room was thick as each damning detail was revealed, inching the scales of justice in their favor. Jack watched as Elena called the first witness to the stand. Emily stood up, her expression calm and determined as she made her way to testify. Her voice was steady as she recounted the events at the diner with precision, detailing the confrontation that had sparked this entire ordeal. Hank Thompson made it abundantly clear that Jack was not welcome in that diner, Emily said firmly, her words unwavering. His words and actions were both discriminatory and threatening. When it was time for cross-examination, the defense attorney, Richard Barnes, rose from his seat. His sharp, calculated tone was meant to disarm, to cast doubt on Emily's testimony. But Emily's calm resolve remained unshaken. "Miss, isn't it possible that you misinterpreted Mr. Thompson's words?" Barnes asked, attempting to plant seeds of doubt in the jury's minds. Emily shook her head, her voice unwavering. No, his intent was clear. He didn't want Jack there because of his race. There was no room for misinterpretation. Barnes pressed on, but Emily's responses remained consistent and precise. Her testimony was solid, compelling the jury to see the truth behind Hank's actions. Then came Jack's turn to take the stand. The weight of the moment settled heavily on his shoulders as he recounted the events at the diner, detailing the discrimination he had faced and the resolve that had driven him to stand up against it. "Mr. Wilson," Barnes began, his tone calculated and precise. "You've had conflicts before, haven't you? Isn't it true that you've been involved in confrontations in the past?" Jack met his gaze head-on, refusing to be intimidated. "I've always handled conflicts professionally," he replied, his voice strong. But this was different. This wasn't about a simple disagreement. This was about standing up for my dignity, for what's right. Barnes tried to chip away at Jack's credibility, but the strength of the evidence and the overwhelming support from the community were too powerful to be undermined. The jury listened intently, their expressions revealing that they saw through the defense's tactics. They had seen the truth for themselves, and there was no turning back now. The battle for justice had been long and grueling, but as Jack and Emily stood united in that courtroom, they knew that victory was within reach. Throughout the trial, Elena masterfully dismantled the defense's attempts to downplay Hank's actions. She methodically called upon victims of Hank's discriminatory practices, each voice adding another powerful thread to the tapestry of injustice that had been woven throughout the proceedings. Their stories were vivid, painful, and undeniable, a collective outcry against the racism that had festered unchecked for far too long. The trial reached its climax when Elena introduced the findings from the corruption investigation. These revelations linked Hank Thompson to the corrupt city councilman, exposing a sinister web of influence and prejudice that stretched far beyond the walls of the diner. This wasn't just a case of one man's bigotry. It was a glimpse into a system that allowed power to shield discrimination and corruption, feeding off the vulnerabilities of those it oppressed. After days of intense testimony and legal arguments, the moment for closing statements arrived. Elena stood before the jury, her presence calm but electrified with purpose. Her voice was steady yet impassioned as she delivered her final words. "This case isn't just about one man's prejudice," she said, her gaze sweeping across the jurors' faces. "It's about standing up to a system that allows this behavior to thrive, unchecked and unchallenged. We've presented the evidence, the testimonies, the hard truths. Now, justice must prevail. I urge you to consider the weight of what you've heard. We cannot let this stand. We must make it right." Barnes, for all his efforts, failed to sway the jury with his attempts to portray Hank as a misunderstood businessman. His arguments seemed feeble against the overwhelming evidence that Elena had built, brick by brick, throughout the trial. As Barnes finished, there was a palpable sense that the scales of justice had tipped decisively against Hank. The jury retired to deliberate, and the courtroom was gripped by a tense silence that stretched on for hours. Every minute felt like an eternity as everyone waited with bated breath. Finally, the jury returned, and the room held its collective breath as the foreman stood, holding the fate of the trial in his hands. In the case of the state versus Hank Thompson, the foreman began, his voice clear and steady. We find the defendant guilty on all counts. A wave of relief swept through the courtroom. Cheers erupted from the public gallery, where supporters of Jack and Emily had gathered, their cries of joy mixing with the raw emotion of the moment. The sense of justice finally served was almost tangible, filling the room with a profound energy. Jack and Emily exchanged a look, one of triumph, exhaustion, and unspoken gratitude. They had fought a long, grueling battle, and this victory was a testament to their resilience and the unwavering support of their community. As they stepped outside the courthouse, surrounded by friends and supporters, Jack felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. The fight for justice wasn't over, but this was a monumental step forward. Together, they had made a difference, a tangible, undeniable difference. And their journey wasn't ending here. It was only just beginning, fueled by the triumph of this moment and the knowledge that they had the strength to continue the fight. The echoes of justice had barely faded from the courtroom when Jack and Emily began to step into their new roles within the community. The fight for equality and justice hadn't ended with Hank's conviction, it had simply evolved into a new chapter. The energy from their victory sparked a wave of initiatives and reforms, galvanizing the community into action. Jack, with his years of service as a police officer and the weight of his recent experiences, took on the leadership of a newly formed community liaison team. His mission was clear: to bridge the gap between the police force and the citizens they served, fostering understanding, trust, and cooperation. He was determined to ensure that what had happened to him would never happen again, not to him, not to anyone. At their first meeting, Jack addressed his team with quiet resolve. "Morning, team," he said, his voice carrying the weight of their shared purpose. "We're here to make a real difference. Our job is to listen, to learn, and to act. Let's work together to build a community we can all be proud of." His team was a diverse group: teachers, activists, business owners, all united by a shared commitment to change. They quickly began organizing forums, workshops, and outreach programs, addressing everything from racial sensitivity training for officers to mentorship programs for local youth. The community was eager to participate, to heal, and to rebuild. Meanwhile, Emily channeled her passion into activism. Her experience at the diner and her role in the trial had given her a platform, and she used it to address systemic issues and support victims of discrimination. Collaborating with local organizations, she became a driving force in efforts to tackle the deep-rooted inequalities that had plagued their community for so long. At one of the community meetings, Emily stood before a group of young women, her voice steady but filled with warmth. "Your stories matter," she said, looking each one of them in the eye. "We're here to make sure they're heard. Together we can create real change." Her words resonated deeply, inspiring a new generation of activists who were ready to stand up and fight for what was right. Emily's efforts led to the creation of a legal aid fund, established in honor of the struggle she and Jack had endured. The fund would provide support to those who couldn't afford legal representation, ensuring that justice was accessible to all, not just those with the means to fight for it. Jack and Emily had emerged from their ordeal stronger, more determined than ever to fight for justice, equality, and the future of their community. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but they were ready to continue the journey they had started, knowing that together they could change the world. The diner, once a battleground marked by hostility and division, had undergone a remarkable transformation. Under new management, it had blossomed into a vibrant hub for the community, a place where neighbors gathered not just for meals, but for connection and unity. The walls, once bare, now told a different story, adorned with colorful murals and photographs that celebrated diversity, resilience, and the power of coming together. It had become a symbol of hope, a testament to how far they had come since that fateful day. One evening, as Jack and Emily sat in their usual booth, the atmosphere around them buzzed with warmth and camaraderie. Laughter echoed from nearby tables, and the smell of comfort food wafted through the air. Emily gazed around the room, her heart swelling with a deep sense of pride and gratitude. She turned to Jack, a smile tugging at her lips. "It's amazing, isn't it? How far we've come." Jack nodded, his eyes reflecting the same mix of pride and hope. "Yeah, it really is. And you know what? This is just the beginning." Their relationship had grown stronger, their bond deepening with every trial they had faced and every triumph they had celebrated together. The battles they had fought, both in and out of the courtroom, had brought them closer, uniting them in a shared purpose. Now, they spent their evenings not only reflecting on their past, but also dreaming of the future they wanted to help shape both for their community and beyond. They knew that challenges would still come their way, but they were ready, knowing they could face anything together. The impact of their case reverberated far beyond the confines of their neighborhood. The legal system was shaken by the revelations brought to light during Hank's trial, and soon after, policymakers introduced reforms to address the gaps and injustices the case had exposed. Activists across the country took note, using Jack and Emily's story as a powerful catalyst for broader, sweeping change. Their fight had become more than just a local battle. It had sparked a national conversation about justice, equality, and the need for systemic reform. One day, Jack and Emily received an invitation to speak at a national conference on social justice. The auditorium was packed, filled with people eager to hear their story. As they stood on stage, looking out at the sea of faces, Jack felt a surge of emotion. This was more than he had ever imagined when they first set out on this journey. "We stand here today," Jack began, his voice strong and clear, not just as survivors of discrimination, but as advocates for change. Our story is one of many, but it shows what's possible when a community stands united. Together, we have the power to shape our future. Emily stepped forward, her voice filled with passion and conviction. "This isn't just about fighting against something, it's about fighting for something. For justice, for equality, for a society where every person is treated with dignity and respect. That's what we're here for." The audience rose to their feet in applause, the sound of their appreciation echoing throughout the auditorium. Jack and Emily left the stage feeling invigorated, inspired by the power of their message and the reception it had received. They were more determined than ever to continue their work, knowing that the impact of their efforts had far-reaching consequences. Back in their community, the work pressed on. Jack led his team in launching new initiatives, including a community police liaison program designed to foster positive and trusting interactions between law enforcement and residents. It was a way to rebuild bridges that had long been broken and to ensure that no one else would endure the kind of discrimination Jack had faced. Emily, meanwhile, expanded her advocacy efforts, partnering with schools to implement anti-bullying programs and educational workshops that addressed issues of racism, prejudice, and acceptance. The Diner, now a thriving community center on weekends, had become a beacon of unity. It hosted potlucks, cultural festivals, and storytelling nights that brought people together from all walks of life. The place had become more than just a restaurant. It was a testament to the resilience of a community determined to heal and grow stronger together. It was a space where neighbors became friends and where every gathering felt like a celebration of the hard-fought victories they had achieved. One crisp autumn evening, as Jack and Emily strolled through their neighborhood, the leaves crunching beneath their feet, they couldn't help but feel a profound sense of accomplishment. The cool air carried a hint of nostalgia, but also the promise of the future they were working to build. They paused in front of a mural that depicted various community leaders, people who had made a lasting impact on the city. Among the faces was a likeness of them both, painted with care by a local artist who had been inspired by their journey. Emily leaned into Jack, her gaze fixed on the mural. "Look at us," she said softly, a smile playing on her lips. "Part of the city's history now." Jack wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close as they both took in the scene before them. "Yeah," he murmured, his voice filled with pride. "We've come so far. But you're right, there's still so much more to do." Emily nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "And we'll do it together," she said firmly. As they continued their walk, the city around them hummed with life. The road ahead was still long, but Jack and Emily knew they were ready to face it hand in hand, driven by the knowledge that together they could continue to make a difference, not just for themselves, but for the world around them. Their journey had not only transformed their own lives, but also sparked a profound ripple effect throughout their community. What had begun as a single painful incident at a diner had grown into something much larger, a story of resilience, unity, and the unyielding fight for justice. Jack and Emily had become symbols of hope, their story inspiring others to rise up against injustice and fight for a better future. And though their battle was far from over, they were more determined than ever, fueled by the strength of their community and their unwavering belief in a brighter tomorrow. As the months passed, Jack and Emily continued to grow into their roles as leaders and advocates. Their story had become emblematic of resilience and the power of standing up against systemic inequality. But they both understood that true, lasting change required constant vigilance, effort, and heart. Real change, they knew, demanded an unwavering commitment to the mission they had set out on, and they remained deeply dedicated to that cause. One of the most significant achievements came with the expansion of their legal aid fund. Donations poured in from all corners of the country, allowing them to build a team of dedicated attorneys who provided pro bono legal services to victims of discrimination and those who lacked the financial means to secure representation. The fund was aptly named the Wilson Rodriguez Justice Initiative, a tribute not only to Jack and Emily's perseverance, but also to Elena Rodriguez's tireless advocacy in the courtroom. At the opening ceremony for the initiative, Jack stood before a large crowd of supporters, community leaders, and local politicians. Behind him, a banner with the name of the initiative fluttered in the breeze, a symbol of the hope and strength it represented. "This fund is about more than just legal support," Jack said, addressing the audience with quiet conviction. "It represents hope that no one has to face discrimination alone, hope that justice is available to everyone, regardless of their background or financial situation." Emily stepped forward, holding the microphone as she added, "Our journey has shown us that change is possible when we stand together. This fund is our way of making sure that others have the resources they need to fight for their rights, to demand justice, and to know that they are not alone." The applause that followed was heartfelt, resonating with the sincerity and determination behind their words. After the ceremony, Jack and Emily mingled with attendees, sharing stories, shaking hands, and listening to others recount their own battles with adversity. Each interaction reminded them why they had started this fight in the first place, to make a difference, one story at a time. In the weeks that followed, Jack continued his work with the community police liaison team, tirelessly addressing the ongoing challenges between law enforcement and the local population. Their efforts included organizing town hall meetings where residents could voice their concerns directly to police officers and local leaders. These meetings became a safe space for honest dialogue, and over time, the tensions that had once simmered beneath the surface began to ease. Slowly but surely, the walls between the community and the police began to crumble, replaced by a growing sense of mutual understanding and cooperation. One evening, after a particularly productive town hall meeting, a young man named Marcus approached Jack. Marcus was a local artist who had been vocal about the need for greater representation and equity in the community. "Hey, Officer Wilson," Marcus said, his tone respectful yet familiar. "I just wanted to say thank you for everything you've been doing. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye with the police, but these meetings ... they've made a difference. I feel like we're finally being heard." Jack smiled and shook Marcus's hand, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. "That means a lot, Marcus. It's not just about the police listening, it's about all of us working together to make this community stronger. We're all in this together." Meanwhile, Emily expanded her advocacy work with a focus on education and youth empowerment. She began visiting local schools to give talks about the importance of standing up for what's right, even in the face of fear or adversity. Her story resonated deeply with students, and soon she was being invited to speak at events across the city. She also launched a mentorship program that paired young women with community leaders, providing them with role models and a network of support that would help them navigate their futures with confidence. One day, Emily received a letter from a young girl named Jasmine, who had attended one of her talks. The letter was filled with gratitude, detailing how Emily's story had inspired her to stand up to bullying at school. Jasmine explained that she had always been quiet, afraid to speak out, but after hearing Emily's journey, she found the courage to confront her bullies and seek help from her teachers. As Emily read the letter, tears welled up in her eyes. It was moments like these that made all the struggles, all the pain, worth it. Knowing that her story had given someone else the strength to stand up for themselves filled her with an overwhelming sense of purpose. She realized that the ripple effect of their work would continue to spread, touching lives in ways she could never have imagined. Jack and Emily's journey had become more than just a fight for personal justice. It had sparked a movement, a force for change that resonated far beyond the diner and the courtroom. They knew that as long as there were people in need, their fight for justice would continue, powered by the strength of their community and their unshakable belief in a better, brighter future. And together, they would keep moving forward, one step at a time, knowing that every small victory brought them closer to the world they were working to build. As Jack and Emily's influence expanded, so too did the reach of their work. Their story, once a local struggle for justice, had grown into a nationwide call to action. Invitations to speak at conferences and events poured in, and they became well-known advocates for social justice and community building. Jack and Emily had moved beyond their own neighborhood, amplifying marginalized voices across the country. Their message, while simple, resonated deeply. Change begins at the grassroots level and is sustained through collective action and perseverance. One day, Jack received a phone call that left him momentarily speechless. A prominent national civil rights organization wanted to nominate him and Emily for an award recognizing their contributions to social justice. The nomination was a profound honor, but as Jack stood in the quiet of their living room, he knew that the real reward was far greater than any recognition. "Emily," Jack said, his voice tinged with awe, "they want to nominate us for an award. Can you believe it?" Emily turned to him, her smile warm and knowing. "I can believe it, Jack. But you know what? The work we're doing every day, that's the real prize. The award, that's just the icing on the cake." Jack nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink in. "You're right. We've got so much more to do, but it's nice to know that people are noticing, that they see the impact." Their journey was far from over, and they both knew it. But they faced the future with hope, their determination unwavering. Every small victory added up to something far greater: a movement, a shift in the way people thought about justice, equality, and the power of community. Jack and Emily were helping to build a world where everyone, regardless of race, background, or circumstance, could walk with dignity and respect. In the end, their story wasn't just about the diner or the trial that had followed. It was about a community that had come together, bound by a shared belief in what was right. Jack and Emily had become symbols of resilience, proof of what could be achieved when ordinary people refused to stay silent in the face of injustice. And they knew that as long as there were battles to be fought, they would be there leading, listening, and standing shoulder to shoulder with those who needed them most. As they walked home that evening, side by side, the world around them felt quieter, yet filled with purpose. The journey they had embarked on seemed long ago, but its echoes still resonated in every step they took. Jack glanced at Emily, her face softened by the glow of the streetlights, and he couldn't help but smile. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" he said, his voice filled with both reflection and pride. Emily looked up at him, taking his hand in hers. "We sure have, Jack. And the best part? We're just getting started." They walked on, hand in hand, knowing that their journey was only beginning. There were still mountains to climb and challenges to face, but with each other and their community by their side, they felt ready for whatever lay ahead. The future was bright, and together they would continue to make the world a better place, one step at a time. After everything you've seen and heard, what have you learned from this story? We encourage you to take a moment and reflect on one thing you've learned that you can bring into practice in your own life. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If you like this video, please leave your comment below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.